Hello, this is Samantha Nolan-Smith from the School of Visibility. How are you? I was chatting with a student and a client last night in a one-to-one meeting we were having, and she raised with me something which a lot of people have raised with me over the years and which I think we need to talk about some more. And that is the way we feel about our accent, or the way we've been treated because of our accent, and what that is, the impact that's having on our experience of being visible, or our willingness to be visible or use our voices more. And this particular person is from Southeast Asia, and lots of people who have raised this with me coincidentally have multiple languages under their belt, are amongst the world's greatest experts on speaking multiple languages, and are fearful of being judged by people who, many of whom only speak one language, and that is English. So there's some irony there that is not missed on me. And what I think is really important to remember here, first of all, obviously there's some work around how people personally have experienced that, and any wounding that's caused, and clearing that out and doing some healing work on that. And it's really important to recognize that this fear arises as a consequence of racism. It arises, can arise as a consequence of colonization. It can arise as a consequence of classism, and it can arise as a consequence of patriarchy, where the literal way our voice expresses itself in the world is deemed unacceptable by one or more of those systems. And so we know that class is a huge issue, expressed in multiple ways, one of which is the way we actually sound when we speak. We know that race, one of the ways that race is judged is through the judgment of voice. And colonization, of course, used language, i.e. imposed the English language. This is colonization by the British Empire specifically, imposed the English language on the countries that they colonized, and in many instances required them not to speak their own language at all. So there's a whole deep and important and socially significant history and present associated with the perception of our voices and language, and we're all carrying this in our awareness to a greater or lesser extent. And one of the things that we spoke about last night, that I said to this lovely student of mine, is, you know, there's a world that you have a vision of and I have a vision of, and it's a world where this isn't a thing. Like, accent isn't something that people would judge other people on. And if we don't speak, those of us who might have different types of accents to some of the more mainstream accents, then what happens is the gaze continues to focus on one particular group of people. And whilst that happens, we don't build the world that we want to build. So if you're committed to building that world, one of the things that is really important is making a decision to continue to use your voice and put it out there and put it out there and put it out there, irrespective of how it's received. That doesn't mean that the whole responsibility is on the person whose voice has been marginalized, but it does mean that there is a job for that person to do. And there's a job for the people for whom they have the privilege of the dominant voice in your community, your society, to open doors for those people. And so when I phrased it in this way and I put it in that context, she said to me, oh, you know what that does? It takes this visibility fear away from being about me, and it actually inspires me, because I then see that I'm making a contribution. I'm actually I'm doing my bit to create the world that I want to be in, I want to live in. And that is the message of today's video. Some of you will have, many of you may perhaps, will have a mix of privileges and disadvantages in this space. And so it's important to adopt that dual role that I've spoken about speaking up where your voice may not be a dominant voice, and creating doors, opening doors where you have the dominant voice. As a non-Indigenous white Australian in the Australian society, I certainly have a dominant voice. But in a global sense, in the Anglosphere, my accent is not the norm. In the sense that it's not American, it's not British. I also have most definitely received some judgment and criticism about my accent. And so I have to continue to remind myself when that happens to keep speaking up, to keep creating space. And in contexts where my voice is dominant or is one of the norm, part of the mainstream, I also have to keep reminding myself to create spaces for voices that we otherwise wouldn't hear. And that way, this whole accent issue eventually dies away because there is no more judgment. This is the goal. There is no judgment on accent. There's simply acceptance of diversity.